She didn't know that I saw everything. Every evening, when the house was enveloped in silence, I was left alone with these thoughts that, like a cold wind, tore me apart from within. I tried to pray, tried to find peace in the words of the Quran, but every time the same image would appear in my mind, her and that man, the school teacher of our children, with whom she spent so much time under the pretext of parent meetings and school events. The first time I noticed her absence from the house, I attributed it to ordinary fatigue or forgetfulness. She said she would return late, that there was a meeting at school. I trusted her as a husband, as a father to our children, as a person who was certain that our lives were built on honesty and faith. But then it started happening more frequently, and that's when I began to feel anxiety turning into tension. Being a man and realizing that everything you knew, everything you trusted, was crumbling before your eyes, is impossible to express in words. I felt something dark, bitter growing inside me, as if I were swallowing poison every day, little by little, but unable to stop it. I tried to push away the thoughts, tried to find excuses, but the internal conflict began to overwhelm me. I couldn't remain silent, but I couldn't speak either. Family always meant everything to me. Being a husband, a father, a support, that was my duty, my responsibility to my wife, my children, to our parents. I didn't want to destroy their worlds. But what to do when your own world is crumbling right before your eyes, and every time you look at your wife, you see the shadow of betrayal. With each passing day, this tension grew, turning my existence into unbearable torment. Silence, like a knife stuck in the throat, which could neither be pulled out nor swallowed. Days passed, and the heaviness inside me became only more unbearable. She answered my questions briefly, without looking me in the eye, and this increased my anxiety. Every time I tried to understand why she was behaving so distant, it seemed that she was moving further away, avoiding direct conversations. There was no longer any warmth in her gaze, and I felt the chasm between us growing wider. Alienation grew like a disease, poisoning everything around, and I didn't know how to stop it. I noticed that the children started asking me questions to which I couldn't find answers. Why doesn't Mom read to us before bed? Or why is she always leaving when we're home? It seemed to me that they also felt this anxiety, just like me, but couldn't understand its causes. I could no longer allow myself to remain silent, because silence had become the rust that was eating away at our home from within. But speaking meant destroying everything we had built, everything I had promised to protect. With each new departure, her excuses became more meaningless, and I, like a ghost, began to follow her. That evening, when I saw her leaving the house, my heart beat like never before, and at the same time it turned to stone. I followed her through the deserted streets, hiding in the shadows, like a stranger. Every minute that I was behind her back was unbearable, but I needed to know the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. When she entered the school, I saw that man meet her. They didn't even try to hide. At that moment, I felt something inside me tearing apart. It wasn't just a blow. It was annihilation. I stood in the darkness, as if chained to the spot, and watched them, unable to move. The confidence I had always been proud of vanished. My world was crumbling, and I no longer knew who I was, a husband, a father, or just a broken man who had lost everything he once had. I saw how they laughed, how they touched each other, how he held her hand, as if it was their world, in which there was no place for me. I felt pain bordering on despair, but deep inside, something else was awakening. It wasn't just anger, it was rage, lurking in the depths of my being. I returned home that night, but sleep did not come. Before my eyes stood the same scene. Her smile, her gaze, which once belonged to me. My mind raced between rage and horror, repelling and at the same time attracting images that I could no longer ignore. It seemed that pain filled every corner of the house. I felt it in every room, in every object, in every quiet sound of the night. This was the home I had created for us, for our family, but now it had turned into a strange, cold place. Waves of shame washed over me. How could I have allowed this? Why didn't I notice earlier? Inside me, a battle raged, and it seemed that this war would never end. Every time I thought of her next to another man, a new wave of rage flared up. But there was also another fear, the fear of losing the family, of losing myself. Wasn't I obligated to do everything to save us, to save the children? Or was everything already lost? I tried to find solace in prayer, but it seemed that even the Almighty had turned away from me. Shame and guilt filled all my thoughts, making me feel worthless, broken, unable to protect my loved ones. I thought about the children, about how they would suffer if the truth came out. They didn't understand everything, but they felt this heavy atmosphere, just like me. I couldn't let them suffer. But what was left for me? To leave everything as it was and live in this hellish silence? I found myself in a trap, unable to remain silent or speak. Any decision seemed like a catastrophe. The internal conflict tore me apart, like a chain that couldn't be removed. Every time I tried to find a way out, I only felt my helplessness more strongly. I felt like a stranger in my own life, a person who didn't belong to either his family or himself. Every evening, I returned to our home, which no longer felt like mine. It seemed that the walls, the painfully familiar rooms and sounds, into which I had once poured my entire life, had become strange, filled with something cold and hostile. Now I noticed how in these walls echoed my own heavy thoughts, anxious silence, and those images that seemed to have taken root in my consciousness. These pictures, her hands, gently lying in his hands, her gaze, tender, as it once was for me, lived in me every minute. I was consumed by the vision of her betrayal, as if I myself, with my own eyes, saw and felt every touch, every smile, every moment they spent together. Wasn't I her husband, the one who was faithful and gave her care? I did everything I could for this family, and the only thing I asked in return was to be honest, to be faithful. And now everything I believed in was destroyed, leaving me in emptiness. Most of all, I was torn apart by shame that I didn't notice anything earlier, that I allowed such a thing to happen. Why did I close my eyes to her distance for so long? Why, despite all the signals, did I not understand anything? I felt deceived and humiliated, and even deeper, in the very heart, there was pain that did not allow me to breathe or think. In this shame, I felt the strongest guilt before the children, who were not to blame for anything. They noticed my depressed state, felt the tension in the house, but did not know what was behind it. Everything seemed like a lie, and not only hers but also mine. I myself lied to the children, pretending to be a happy family, maintaining the appearance of normality. But every time I looked into their trusting eyes, I realized that destruction was inevitable. I felt that I had to protect them, shield them from pain, but I didn't know how. I no longer had confidence in either myself or my right to the truth. To remain in this silence meant to sink even deeper into the abyss, losing myself, but to speak meant to break their children's souls. And yet, a feeling grew within me that I could not suppress. Rage, growing like a fire, fueled by betrayal and my own weakness, burned away all remnants of control. I prayed, sought answers, but neither faith nor time brought me peace. I saw them, her and him, as if in reality, and with each time, it became harder for me to separate reality from visions. They filled my thoughts and, like a poisonous seed, took root deep in my soul. My rage grew along with the feeling that I was nothing more than a shadow, unable to protect either myself or my children. With each passing day, I became more distant, and people around me noticed. Colleagues cast strange glances at me. Friends asked about my condition with concern. But I could not and did not want to share this. How could I admit to someone that my entire life had collapsed? That I could not trust the closest person? A sense of isolation gripped me. I cut myself off from everyone, left alone with the dark part of myself that demanded an answer to this betrayal. In this endless silence, in this isolation, every day of mine turned into a test. I stopped being myself, could not look in the mirror without feeling disgust for myself. It was as if my life had lost meaning, turning into a dark, merciless labyrinth, in which neither exit nor salvation existed anymore. With each passing day, my condition became more and more unbearable. The feeling of shame and rage overwhelmed me, burning away the remnants of reason. I sank deeper, as if drowning, and no thoughts could bring me back to the surface. All my life, everything I believed in, seemed to have crumbled to the foundation, turning into ruins that I didn't even know how to put back together. I was trapped, surrounded by my own silence, and in my soul reigned such tension that any word or movement could destroy everything that was left of my family. One night, when the house was shrouded in darkness, I decided that I could no longer remain silent. I felt that if I continued to keep all this inside, I would go completely mad. I had to find out what was really happening, even if it would cost me everything. I had to know, and perhaps in this knowledge, I would find an answer to how to live on. The next morning, I chose a moment when she was alone. I wanted to start the conversation calmly, without reproaches, but as soon as I opened my mouth to say the first words, it seemed to me that the fire of rage, accumulated over all these weeks, exploded inside me. I saw her before me and could no longer bear it. Questions poured out one after another, each one painful, each one like a blow. Do you think I don't understand anything? My voice was cold, full of bitterness and hidden anger. Do you think I'm blind? She froze, her eyes widened, and in them flashed something that I hadn't seen in years. At that moment, I realized that she knew everything, that her lie was conscious, that she herself had chosen the path of betrayal. All my questions, all my doubts turned out to be true, and now there was no way back for us. She didn't try to justify herself. Her silence was an answer to me, much stronger than any confession. This silence, heavy and deep, filled the space between us, as if fate itself had decided that we had nothing more to say to each other. I looked at her and felt the pain pulsating in my chest, not just anger, but deep, devastating pain, as if I had lost not only her, but also myself. You chose this yourself, I whispered, and my voice trembled. I didn't want to look weak, but every cell of my body screamed in despair. Tell me, why? She was silent again, and her gaze slid across the room, avoiding mine. In this silence, I heard everything she didn't say. Her choice was made. All our life, our family, everything turned out to be a bargaining chip for her. I looked at the person I once considered close and realized that now a stranger stood before me. This silence became the last straw for me. I knew that I could no longer forgive. In this moment, full of tension and internal struggle, my life gained a new point of no return. That night was dark and silent, as if nature itself knew what I had to do. The moonlight pierced through the rare clouds, illuminating the house and the barely visible school on the horizon, as if pointing the way for me. I felt this light, cold and alien, which pierced my soul and finally froze all remnants of pity or doubt. At that moment, I became empty, like a shell filled with only determination. She left the house again, with the same cold calmness with which she had left all these evenings. I watched her go, feeling all the feelings that I had suppressed for so long reach their limit. This was not just jealousy, not just pain. It was a cold, burning fire that filled me from within. I took the keys, went out after her, and moved along the empty road, hiding in the shadows, as if the very darkness had predestined me to meet her that night. At the moment when I saw them together, when the light from the window of the office illuminated their intertwined silhouettes, my consciousness plunged into darkness. For a moment, it seemed to me that I no longer existed. I was just a faceless shadow watching them touch each other, as if in this world there was neither me nor our family, nor the children who trusted us. This was the moment when all my feelings merged into one single thought. I had to put an end to this. Inside the office, I moved towards them almost silently, not feeling the weight of my own steps, pulse, or breath. Inside me, complete darkness reigned, devoid of any pity. Their faces turned to me in shock, but this look, full of fear, did not touch me. On the contrary, it only confirmed that my feelings were true, that everything I felt, all my fears and doubts, had turned into that very destructive reality that stood before me. I saw his face, his fear, his helplessness, and this only fueled my rage. My hands acted on their own, as if they knew what to do better than me. I don't remember the blows, I don't remember the sounds, only how he fell to the floor, his eyes full of panic and pain, in which, finally, a glimmer of understanding flashed. This was his last spark, and with each moment, it faded, disappearing into the darkness. He disappeared, becoming just a shadow that remained in my consciousness, no different from those ghosts that had haunted me all these months. She stood nearby, petrified, silent and paralyzed. In her gaze was a mixture of horror and pain, but it no longer touched me. She also became a stranger to me, barely more real than a faceless shadow. She also realized what had happened, and did not utter a sound, her face distorted with fear and horror. We stood there, in this ominous silence, when finally realization came. It was all over. I looked at her, not recognizing her, as if a stranger stood before me. At that moment, my soul, my life, everything that was dear and sacred, collapsed completely, leaving me in emptiness.